Hi, welcome to another Saturday Junior Developer Happy Hour. Thanks for coming. We're excited to see everybody here. I'm excited to hear from our special guest today. And if you are new, Junior Developer Happy Hour just started up this spring. We've always been remote. Sam and I both recognize that getting your first job as a developer is really tricky. From there, it'll get easier, but we just don't want anyone to give up hope when you've already come so far and are so close. So we're trying to get a lot of different opinions from different people, different perspectives to try to help as many people trying to get into development as possible. So we are going to be done with this little intro in just a minute, but the best way, because this is AMA format, it's like Q&A, it's ask me anything, ask us anything. So the best way to ask the questions is going to be, I'll open up the chat and just double check. I know we've already posted the Slido once. So that Slido link right there, open that up in a different tab right now, because that's going to be the best place for you to go to ask questions that the most people are. We're going to be going by that because you can upvote the questions. We'll be sure to be able to answer the questions that the most people are interested in hearing answers to, just to be most efficient with our time in case we don't get through all the questions, because typically we haven't been. If you're able to stay around until the very end, that is when we'll invite people to come off mute and we can have more of a conversation. And we will stop recording for that to happen. So that way everybody feels as comfortable as possible to get to know each other. And that part's pretty cool. So that's enough about the meetup. I'm Brady. I'm a full stack engineer at Nordstrom Trunk Club. I was hired on at Trunk Club before they got fully absorbed into Nordstrom. So we're like a Stitch Fix competitor, basically. My part of Nordstrom is, and I myself went to Dev Bootcamp in 2017 and got hired at Trunk Club and have been working there ever since. So Stack is front end is like JavaScript, React, back end Ruby, and then lots of integration stuff going on right now. So that's enough about me. I'll let Sam say some words and then we'll get to it.
Hey everybody, I'm Sam, co-host this meetup with Brady. Just quick intro of myself. Um, I am a front-end engineer, currently on sabbatical. I most recently worked at Lyft for about a year and a half, working on internal tools for their mapping organization. But I'm in the process of moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm doing the Tulsa remote program, just going to go experience living somewhere totally different, which I seem to do a lot in my life. Originally from Hawaii, I've done the Peace Corps, lived in West Africa, San Francisco, I lived in New York, a bunch of places. But I also went to Dev Bootcamp back in 2013. But I also have a computer science degree, which I got a long time ago during the dot-com bust. And I actually gave up looking for a job that first time trying to break into the industry. So one of the reasons we started this meetup is like to encourage people not to give up, because it's hard to get their first job. But you now there's a lot of like meetups like this. There's a lot of support. There's like groups like communities like Career Karma, and there's a lot of just tools to help you um, break into the industry and to keep leveling up your skills. Because if you keep leveling up, people are not going to be able to ignore that. They're going to want you to come and help them build stuff. um, so let's get to our special guest this week. Super stoked about our guest. We got Tigran Sloyan. Hope I said your name right.
You nailed
he,
it.
he's the founder and CEO of CodeSignal. If people haven't used CodeSignal, it's awesome. It's my favorite like one of like algo data structure practice websites. So I'll let you introduce yourself,
Mhm.
and also if you can tell us a little bit about CodeSignal for people who don't know about the
Sure,
platform.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Thank you for having me, Sam and Brady. This is great to be here. Not a typical thing I do on Saturdays, but always exciting. So my name is Tigran Sloyan. As Sam said, I run a company called CodeSignal. We're on a mission to really help the world go beyond resumes. And what going beyond resumes means is being able to identify talent when the talent exists instead of relying on pedigree as a standard mechanism for identifying it, right? Like, and for many of you who are unfamiliar with it at this point, I think the most likely way you will get to interact with it for the first time is when you apply to a company, and a lot of companies from Robinhood to Uber to Quora are using CodeSignal and use it in very often for junior developers too, to really automate that first screening, the first technical screening. And when you automate that first technical screening, you get leverage, right? Because what happens is there's thousands and thousands of junior developers applying to these companies. Those with CS degrees, those without CS degrees, those from top tier schools, those from lesser known schools. And from a company's perspective, it's basically impossible to interview everyone. So unfortunately, many companies resort to essentially looking at resumes and using very old school keywords to really identify who should be moving forward in the process. Our mission has been to eliminate that as much as possible and to make it more fair and to give everybody a fair chance to actually do this. Now, as Sam mentioned, we also have a consumer side where you can practice your skills. It's interestingly enough, people who are more junior probably know CodeSignal more from the consumer side, but the consumer side has been much less of a focus over the last few years, whereas the B2B side, the assessment side of it has been at the very, very core.
Awesome. Could you also give a little more background on your background? Because I believe you are a software engineer as well. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my background is in software engineering. So I went to MIT. Actually, before MIT, I was a big time math nerd. I did lots of math competitions, international math contests. That's what kind of got me to MIT. And at some point in MIT, I realized that, once you remove the competitive aspect from math, I don't really enjoy math as much. So I kind of switched to doing more computer science and got my CS degree. After that, worked at a couple of companies, Google, Oracle in particular. And then it's a longer story, but at some point got to realize how broken the world is and how much it depends on pedigree as a proxy for ability. Because really, like, going through MIT, a lot of people ask me like, oh, well, you didn't have that problem, right? You had the pedigree. Why kind of did it bother you? And the interesting thing is that it's the other way around, right? When you go through MIT, you actually see what other people who went through MIT, including you, are capable of. Because if you've never been there, you kind of make up this big story in your head that like, oh, everybody who must be getting a CS degree from there is going to be a genius and everybody else isn't. It's not necessarily true, right? People get there for many different reasons. Some were good at biology, I was good at math. And then at some point for career choices, a lot of people end up doing computer science. Some of them get kind of barely passing grades and you get a CS degree. And then once you have the MIT CS degree, you get so much attention you can barely handle it. Whereas I've known many, many other developers, many of them who were close friends of mine who were amazing, but they just, for various circumstances, never ended up going to like a pedigree school or having any pedigree company on their resume. And I've seen firsthand how hard it has been for them to get their foot in the door versus those who just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
Awesome. All right. Can we start with the questions, Brady? And then I'll post the link again. If people have questions, please ask in the Slido. And you can upload any questions that are in there.
Yeah, thanks. And then the thing that I had forgotten to say earlier, just in case people are new, yes, the Slido is the best place to ask questions. for people to upvote and for us to prioritize. If you do end up having a follow-up question, or if there's resources that we end up talking about that a link can get dropped to, that's a really good spot. That is where people can post in the Zoom chat. So cool. Here we go. First question here is from Sam. If you complete all the challenges for a company on CodeSignal, do the companies get notified?
Yeah, great question, Sam. That's actually how things used to work, right? So CodeSignal used to be more around like very consumer centric, where it was like it used to even be called Code Fights. It was like a gamified website where you could challenge others into, coding battles. And then company challenges was one of the sort of additions in that theme. And the business model was, as you continue doing well, we would connect you to companies, and then if you got hired, we'll make some profit as a company's paying us, basically, model, right? While that model worked okay, eventually we realized that the whole flow of, identifying people on our website, attracting people to the website, identifying it, getting them matched, tracking them, and making sure that when they get hired, companies paid us. That wasn't really what we were trying to fix. What we were trying to fix is identifying talent, right? What we were good at is automating the process in which you can fairly identify whether somebody is qualified or not. So at some point in 2018, we completely pivoted the business to, all right, we're just going to sell the software that powered CodeFights or CodeSignal back in the day to companies to enable them to do this, and then not worry about like who got connected to whom, and never worry about charging companies for hiring anybody. So while prior to 2018, company challenges were like a big way in which you got discovered, right now it's just left there for practice. So companies don't get notified. There is no process in which you're going to be contacted, but it's still great practice. It's still a great way to be trying out your skills. So we try to maintain it as much as possible.
Okay, awesome. I was asking that because SpaceX is on there, and I would like to work at SpaceX one day. So
yeah,
I was just wondering if that increases your chances, but I get it now. It's like good practice if you're gonna go interview at the companies, because like
exactly.
on LeetCode you have to pay, I think, if you want to do company specific challenges. I could be wrong about that, but I haven't tried LeetCode in a long time because I like CodeSignal better since I found it.
All right. Here's another question then. What else to focus on while completing the challenge other than making sure to pass? Is like speed, accuracy, etc. And what to pay attention to while working on challenges?
Yep. So I guess just so we make the differentiation clear, going forward, I'm going to keep talking mostly about when you're taking a test on CodeSignal, because I promise you, if you haven't done it yet, you're going to do it. Like there are so many companies using CodeSignal as an assessment platform that one day, sooner or later, actually, it's a good thing, right? If you get to that assessment, that means you're in the interview, you're in the first process. The IDE and everything else is highly consistent with what you see on the consumer side. So I'm just going to keep responding to these questions as if you were going to take an assessment on CodeSignal, and that assessment was going to be your go, no-go points in terms of do you move forward in the interview process or you don't. Now, what to pay attention to, accuracy in getting the question right is like absolutely the number one thing, right? If you don't get the question right, the automated scoring system is going to penalize you for it heavily, because sort of functional correctness, as we call it, did you get the code to do what it was supposed to do, is like the number one important thing. After that, it's actually more the style and how you structure the code. Because one thing people don't realize is companies actually get a playback, like keystroke by keystroke, event by event playback of what exactly happened in the process. So let's say you didn't get there, you got there. Like, how did you get there, right? Was it just like a mess of a code that you had 5 nested for loops and God knows what happening? Or was it a very structured, deliberate, thoughtful process of getting to that functionally correct solution? And then from there, speed does make a difference in terms of if you're taking one of our standardized assessments, there is a little differentiation between those who did it a little bit faster than others because it shows more mastery, but it's very small difference. You would never get any significant scoring difference if you did it really fast and then others, or you did it somewhat slower. As long as you got to a correct result and your code looks good, you're in a great shape.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it was recorded and they could watch.
It's not a video or anything. So the key is that we record, obviously if we recorded videos, you would like storage wise, we would just blow up the system altogether. But we record keystrokes and runs and executions and everything. It actually is one of the most favorite parts of hiring managers because they actually get to see your thought process, which is often more important than like, did you eventually get it or not? And if you actually didn't get to a correct solution, in many cases, hiring managers would still take a chance and look at were you on the right track versus you were just kind of completely lost in the weeds there.
Wait, so if it isn't a video, like how do you convey that to the companies, like how the person tried to solve it?
Yeah. It's literally event recording, right? So imagine keystroke events recorded. So it's like this massive file that says Sam typed A, Sam typed B, Sam typed C, Sam ran the code, Sam got this execution error. It's like every single event is recorded and then it's played back, right? So essentially it's like when we have an interface in which you can click play and then that entire session would be played back as it's a video, but it's not actually a video. So storage wise, much cheaper. And it gives you can even like select, pause, like, copy that code, modify and see if the person was on the right track or not. So
so it's like a time travel kind of tool.
Exactly. Yep. And you can accelerate it. That's the best part. So like I don't have to sit watch you do it for like the whole hour you try to do it. I can go 32x speed and then you really look great and I can understand how you were thinking through it.
And the platform is exactly the same as the consumer one that we get to use on the website?
Yeah, when you're taking assessments, you can even do it. When you go to Test Center on CodeSignal, there is a practice general coding assessment you can take, and GCA is by far the most popular assessment for early talent and junior developers. There's a practice assessment that literally shows you what it would be like taking an assessment with a real company.
Okay, that seems like it would be good practice, and especially if you know the company is going to give you a CodeSignal assessment.
Yeah, but the idea and everything is exactly the same as what you would see when you're doing arcade or company challenges or any of the other ones.
We've got a couple follow-up questions in the chat about this. It sounds like benefit to be able to let the company understand a little bit more of your thought process. Would it hold somebody back? Have you ever had somebody work on a challenge in a different IDE and then paste the answer in so that they don't have all of that thought process available?
Does happen, and we don't necessarily prohibit that, even though we heavily encourage people to write it in the IDE itself. And again, this is like, it highly depends on the company. Like this would be smaller companies who would actually, especially if you didn't get the functional correctness right, they would still go look at it. Because like larger companies, they process thousands of candidates on a weekly basis. There's no way engineering managers are going to be like one by one looking at playbacks. But here's the other interesting piece of this though, right? Like the report that we generate, like the CodeSignal assessment report, is meant to be replacing or at least augmenting the resume. Because believe it or not, what happens in the debriefs, right? Once you've gone through an interview and then there's a debrief to hire you or not to hire you, your resume is sitting in front of every interviewer. It's sad, but it's true, right? So every interviewer is coming into that discussion whether to hire or not hire you with your resume hanging over. And if that resume isn't looking great, you better believe it's gonna, decrease your chances of getting there. Now, what we aim to do is CodeSignal's assessment results should not just be like top of the funnel, go, no go decision maker, but also later in the process, right? So when you're doing that debrief, you can be looking at the playback at that point and seeing like, okay, this person maybe failed one of the interviews, but let's see how they thought through this CodeSignal assessment, and then let's dive deeper as an extra data point, just so you're not saying, okay, well, this person gets really nervous when they're at an interview, no hire, because a lot of these debriefs and decision makings come out to like a maybe. Okay. Some people say yes, some people say no. And the way that maybe is decided, unfortunately, without CodeSignal, it very often tends to be those who have a Google and a Stanford and an MIT in there, and they're like, oh, well, this person must be good. They maybe just kind of got nervous, right? And if they don't have it, it's the other way around. So the reason we have that detailed insight into kind of how you've thought through, how you've approached something, is to help them, instead of relying on a resume, relying on the CodeSignal assessment to make that decision.
All right. And then if they haven't been able to finish, do they get to explain their thought process at all?
You can always write comments to help explain the thought process, especially if, it's one of the harder questions. There's typically more than one question. So elaborating on it, even though time is typically limited, so you might not have as much time to explain, but brief comments that outline it can never hurt. The only way it can hurt is like you're slowing yourself down. But like going back, if you've got an extra 10 minutes in the end to just kind of explain with a few comments what you were thinking, can always help.
Have you thought about letting the candidate upload a short video to explain?
We have. Here's the problem: bias, right? Like we try to eliminate bias as much as possible, and adding that video is like yes, it will help explain the thought process, but one of the beauties of having CodeSignal as your first sort of evaluation is that CodeSignal doesn't care what you look like, what your gender is, what your skin color is. As soon as you add the video back, whoever is reviewing it, they're going to bring their bias package into it, and believe it or not, you are going to get some advantage or disadvantage from it.
Yeah, that's really cool that you are considering that. It's an important challenge to overcome right now.
Yep, absolutely.
Here's another question. How can people best prepare for the coding challenges on CodeSignal?
Yeah, I mean, look, CodeSignal is structured in a way where it shouldn't be something that is like you need to test prep for necessarily, right? We aim to make it as industry relevant as possible. Like if you're a senior React engineer, you're going to get React questions. It's not just algorithms, right? So some people keep thinking that like, if it's CodeSignal, it's got to be what people call lead code style questions. No, there's lead code style questions, and CodeSignal has many of those too. That's algorithms and data structures, that's core. And yes, for most junior developers, that is what you're ultimately going to be evaluated on, because companies do not expect specialized knowledge from junior developers. However, if you do have industry experience, in many cases, what you will get evaluated on is your industry relevant skills. So for example, right now, we have a senior JavaScript developer role at CodeSignal. If you come apply, the test you're going to get is going to say, here is a class in Java that you're trying to implement, like it's a job queue, and you have to understand promises in JavaScript. You have to understand how asynchronous loops work, like everything that a senior JavaScript developer would do and should know as a way to evaluate. All this to say is that if you're good at what you do, you shouldn't need sort of separate practice for CodeSignal. That said, though, like being familiar with the environment would never hurt, right? So like doing some of that practice assessments, and before you start any test, there is a practice test attached to it, which like has zero, companies don't get to see it. Nothing is visible from that side. There's no timer. Your main test time doesn't even start when you're doing the practice. So try it out. You can customize the IDE as well. Like if you like Vim key bindings, you can turn it into Vim. If you like Emacs, you can turn it into Emacs. If you like light theme, make it a light theme. All of that will persist when you go to taking the main assessment, and it will save you time, because if you haven't done that and you haven't gotten comfortable in the environment, you're probably going to be spending 5 minutes or so in the beginning messing around with this instead of focusing on the assessment.
Are those practice tests available on the consumer side to practice like the specific, like if you want to practice React test or something
There are
like that?
some in the daily challenges section. So if you go to
Oh,
daily
okay.
challenges, there should be a filter for the type of question that you want to do. Let me just
Okay.
double check, because again, this hasn't been part of the focus these days. So if you go to all types, there it is. So if you go to daily challenges and click on all types, there's front-end UI, front-end dynamic, database questions, DevOps questions. So you can definitely practice some of that environment. So database questions would mostly be like write a query that works with usually an SQL database, even though we have non-SQL, we have Postgres. So.
Okay, awesome.
All right. So here's another question. What do you value most in a junior coder? Is their thought process and potential to learn? Or is it a deeper understanding of a specific language? Or is it something else, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess let's start with me personally. Me personally, I value work ethic. I think, and not just in a developer or anyone, like work ethic, self-discipline to me are the most important things that you can learn and you can practice. And it takes, just like coding, it takes many hours of practice to be able to get yourself to do things and work on things that you may or may not want to do. It's not just you either want to, or you don't want to, right? There's a part of your brain that says, hey, let's just hang out and watch Netflix. And there's another part that says, no, we've got to work and we've got to get this thing through. And that's, to me, is self-discipline. And I believe you're not born with it. You'll practice it day in, day out. And learning to code is a great practice of self-discipline, because very few people wake up in the morning and say, oh, great day for writing code all day, right? It takes a level of self-discipline to get you through it. Now, when it comes to CodeSignal assessments and my knowledge of the industry, very few companies value a knowledge of a specific language from a junior developer, right? When it comes to junior developers, you're not necessarily expected to be an expert in a specific language. That's actually what senior developers are expected to know, right? If you think of software development and the layers of knowledge there is what we call core, where it's like, can you translate English into code? Do you understand some of the core techniques to make things run efficiently? Then there's the language layer, right? Where it's like, do you understand specifics of JavaScript? Do you understand specifics of Java? Then there is the framework layer. Do you know React? Do you know Vue? Do you know Spring, Java Spring, or like Django, right? They all build on top of each other. A lot of bootcamps try to skip the core, and I've always said it's a mistake. I believe to a certain degree you have to really understand, regardless of your language of choice, right? Can you translate English into code, and can you do it in an effective enough manner so you're not consuming every bit of resource available on that computer? And then build the rest, because without that solid foundation, something in your framework one day is going to break, and then you're going to be clueless of like why it's happening, because you don't understand the core behind it. And most companies who know how to hire junior developers well focus on the core more than anything else. Because yes, some junior developers know some language layer, some framework layer, but most of them, especially those who went through a traditional CS program, they don't know anything aside from the core. So companies concentrate on measuring the core and then building up the rest once you're on the job.
It's very interesting to hear. For developers who don't have a traditional degree looking to break into the industry, are there any tips for applying and getting noticed for them?
Yeah, target CodeSignal customer companies. I'd say that's like most of our customers go beyond resumes. Most of our customers do give a chance for every junior developer who applies, and don't bias based on your resume. It's still a tough market, right? So you still have to be prepared, because there is thousands of others you're competing against. But the truth is the industry is moving towards a more ability-based approach, a more skills-based approach at a really, really fast pace, right? So, I mean, there's going to be setbacks. There's going to be like, oh, I applied, never heard back. It's very common, but the belief that if you keep getting better and better, at the end of the day, if you're highly skilled, it's a very high demand market. One of these companies is going to give you an opportunity to prove that you're highly skilled. And once you do, you'll move through the process. So I think it's like, try to ignore the setbacks and understanding there are companies, and every day there are more and more companies who focus on what you can do and not what your background says that you can do. And having that belief and continuously practicing day in, day out and building that skill. Because there is really, I mean, no limit of it, right? Like software engineering is such a large, complex field that you can continuously get better and better. And having that growth mindset is really critical for breaking through.
Is there a list of companies posted anywhere?
The best place to find it is you just go to CodeSignal.com and go customers. So if you go to CodeSignal.com, you'll get to our landing page. And then at the top, there is a customers section. And when you go to the customer section, you can actually also see lots of case studies of how companies leverage CodeSignal for this. At the very top, it's the video from Robinhood saying how they've really managed to scale their university recruiting program using CodeSignal, including hiring from lots of bootcamps and self-taught developers. So,
awesome, thanks.
You had been talking about what a hiring manager would see when they're sent a report. Are you able to demo that? Is there anything online that would show something like that?
I'm not going to attempt to demo it because I haven't been doing demos for a while. However, if you go to CodeSignal's YouTube channel, there is all sorts of videos showing it all, right? And automated assessments is only one component of it, by the way. We also have a collaborative mode of the same thing, which is very often used for interviews, right? So that same IDE, but in a collaborative version of it, where and there's also an integrated whiteboard in case they want to do sort of a system design interview with you. So when you go to our YouTube channel and go to product demos section, there's all sorts of overviews of what hiring managers and companies see.
And Brian posted it. Well done, Brian. This one is, I think, maybe just a comment. How can they be as good of a creator as CodeSignal? Well, no. What sorts of things have you learned throughout building CodeSignal that you could share with us? Like, because, yeah, creating something that helps people's skills and assesses people's skills is really great.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that it's as much of feels great as much of a responsibility, right? Because when you build something where it's like, I don't want to put down any specific product, but like when Facebook goes down or doesn't work, like great, you've got, a few hours of your day back to do something productive. When CodeSignal doesn't work or goes down, it's someone's, dreams and career on the line, right? So it's a massive, massive responsibility to make sure that every candidate has an awesome experience, every company has an awesome experience. And trust me, whenever we have outages, it's panic all across the board, right? Candidates are like, oh my God, I was in the middle of a test and something broke. Like our customers are like, my interviews are paused, what's going on? So we try to minimize that as much as possible, but it's high stakes. It's very high stakes, and making sure that it's always as great as it can be is a huge responsibility. I guess the one word answer that I have is hiring, really, right? Like hiring amazing people and finding great people to build this. I mean, there is no way I could have done this by myself or with 2 or 3 or 4 people. It's an effort of an amazing team, a collective who believes in creating something bigger than themselves, making a difference in the world. Because, Tony Hsieh used to say that life is energy, and it's what you use energy for is to bring about change. Some people bring about positive change, other people bring about negative change or no change whatsoever. So bringing a group of people together and enabling them to do their life's work and make a difference in the world is really what it's all about. It's a different skill than software programming, but it's also a skill that you can practice and get better at. And I promise you, I was not very good at it in the beginning, but I've gotten progressively better and better as time has gone by.
Well, it sounds like you have a growth mindset too, which is
absolutely
everything. What types of challenges are usually given to more junior roles?
Yeah, it's very algorithms and data structures focused. Now, when it comes to algorithms, data structures, there's also good and bad, right? So we encourage companies that work with us to rely on the so-called general coding assessment, which is our standardized assessment for junior developers. Because what happens is when companies try to build their own algorithms and data structures assessments for junior developers, starting from giving algorithms that they themselves can't do, or to algorithms that has nothing to do with uh, the modern world at all, right? Because there's some algorithms that are just too theoretical. Okay, like everything is an algorithm. I mean, when people say algorithms and they have an allergy from it, I mean, everything is an algorithm. An algorithm is a process of doing something, right? So like if you write any code, it's algorithm. Now, what people typically associate with algorithms is things that are like classic algorithms, like a binary search algorithm, like a tree traversal algorithms, right? Now, there is an extent to which they still keep being useful. And then at some point, it's so rare that unless you're working on a very specific research project, you're never going to come across that algorithm. So we do a lot of work with our clients and creating an industry standard assessment for this to make sure whatever algorithms you get assessed on are actually important. They can come up in a real world, right? Like for example, most search algorithms, I mean, in the real world programming, sooner or later, you're going to run into a situation where you've got a list of things and you've got to find something specific in that list. It could be a shopping cart, it could be whatever, right? That does happen a lot in the real world. And if you're working somewhere where that's millions of data points, unless you know how to do that effectively, you're going to crash the servers, right? So like algorithms are actually helpful. I think a lot of junior developers get misled in believing algorithms don't matter at all. Just learn React. It's not true. There's effective ways of doing things, and there is, decades of theory behind how to do certain things more effectively than others. And it's good to know it, but there's also a limit. For example, when designing our general coding assessment, there was a massive debate around should dynamic programming, which is a technique in problem solving in algorithms, be part of it. And there was a deliberate decision in collaboration with many CTOs and VPs of engineering that it shouldn't be. So we left out dynamic programming. Whenever you take a standardized CodeSignal assessment for junior developers, you wouldn't have a question that requires you to understand dynamic programming. Because after a lot of debate, the decision was none of these heads of engineering could come up with a real world scenario in their career where they had to apply dynamic programming to a real world problem. And thus, that means it shouldn't be there. I'm sure in theory you can come up with it. If you go read algorithms books, there's lots of examples where it's applicable. But if an engineer with like 20 years of experience and who's head of a large company's engineering or can't think of one real world example where it came up, doesn't go into a junior developer assessment.
Very interesting. Here, based on your unique experiences, what area or areas of JavaScript do most junior developers need more practice with?
It's a great question. I guess JavaScript is very unique because it's a really popular language. It's one of those languages that's most likely, my theory has always been that it's going to be the most dominant language years later because it's what all front-end development uses, and that means it's irreplaceable. And then as it grows in capacity and its backend work, it's just going to be the one that lasts longer and keeps the popularity longer and overshadows everybody else. CodeSignal, I guess I've had this belief for a long time. So CodeSignal is full stack JavaScript. So it's built front end, back end, everything happens in JavaScript, which is always fun. Now, what do people mostly struggle with is understanding what makes JavaScript different, right? Like JavaScript, like other languages, is so-called general programming language. All general programming languages can do certain things. And that's why when you're taking somewhat more of an algorithmic assessment on CodeSignal, you can use JavaScript, you can use Python, they all get the job done because there's nothing in that language that needs, none of the unique aspects of the language are important here. However, JavaScript does have many unique elements, and most junior developers don't understand what really makes JavaScript different from something like Python, who's historically like a backend language, right? Everything from understanding what is a promise. A lot of it has to do with synchronousness because it's been primarily built as a front-end language. So that idea is like you send a request and you're waiting for that to come back. And while you're waiting, you want to keep going with your life instead of sort of blocking everything else that happens on the page while you're waiting for some piece of data. So the synchronous aspect of it, most junior developers really struggle with understanding and truly understanding what techniques over the past 5 or so years, because JavaScript has changed, right? If all you know about JavaScript is like jQuery, we're way past jQuery at this point, right? There's lots of really fun things that JavaScript does, and how to write JavaScript code in a way that you like it's very maintainable. It's just as good as any sort of originally backend language can be.
Great. If someone wants to reattempt an assessment, does the previous score affect the test taker later, or is it a clean slate each time?
Yeah, great question. It's under your control. So again, we have standardized assessments, we have custom assessments, okay? Standardized assessments is what we create and maintain, such as the general coding assessment, and companies across the board use it. And the beauty of our standardized assessments is once you take it with one company, you actually have the option to share your results with another. You don't have to keep retaking the same assessment over and over again, which developers love because it saves a lot of time if you've done well once. Now, when it comes to taking data again, you choose whether you share your previous result or not, because some people do want to share it. Some people want to say, hey, I took this 6 months ago and I took it now. Look how much progress I've made. Because truth be told, what really matters is how fast you're growing, not where you are right now. So having that historic perspective and sharing it in many cases helps. But if you don't want to share, let's say you took it once, you're really not proud of how you did, and you just want to take it again and have no one else know, you can absolutely hide those results and not share it with anybody else. But when it comes to an individual assessment score, individual assessment scores never connected to your last time you took it or whatever else you did. It's just confined to that one assessment that you've completed.
Got it. Okay. Are you able to give any statistics or like on the most popular algorithms and data structures that companies test on? Or do you have a way of prioritizing what people might be able to focus on first? Could be a different way of asking this.
Yeah, I keep going back to the general coding assessment. At some point, we will make a sort of a publicly consumable version of GCA that describes what sorts of algorithms that you should expect to be tested on. I guess there is a really popular book on algorithms. Can't remember the name, but MIT uses it. Most other schools use it. There's an acronym for it, CLRS or something. It's the author's acronyms. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. It's really popular. Let's see if I can find it. CLRS. Oh, there. I still remember it. So CLRS is Introduction to Algorithms. If you just search CLRS algorithms, you'll find it. Now, this book starts really simple. There is like probably the first 30-40% of this is what's really core and what's really common. And then the sort of second half of the book, or the other 60%, goes into deep, very academic style algorithms. So if you're trying to understand kind of what's the progression of really applicable to like rarely applicable, I would say get this book and try to make your way through it as far as you can go. The farther you go, the higher the chances. But I'm sure if you covered half of it, you would be in a really great shape, because in the first half, they really cover pretty much every widely applicable algorithm and what you're likely to be tested on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I see the links already showing up in the chat. Perfect. Here's a question wondering if Code Bootcamp graduates tend to do well, like better or worse than university graduates. Is there any noticeable code bootcamps that produce good candidates?
It's a great question. Depends on what type of an assessment. So coding bootcamp graduates tend to know more about language and framework layers than traditional computer science graduates, and vice versa. Right? It really depends on what you were taught. Most coding bootcamps, which in my opinion is a mistake, because the truth is most companies still hire, their approach to hiring junior developers is based on the traditional CS degree. So you've got to be educating on that and not just sort of like this. You're trying to change too many things, right? I've told this to many bootcamps. It's like, it's amazing. You're trying to give people opportunity when to career switch, to learn something new, but you shouldn't also at the same time try to change what companies look for when they're hiring, because that's too many things to change, right? You want to focus on changing a few things and leaving the rest for somebody else to change. So most coding bootcamps tend to focus on, let's teach you React day 2. I'm sure, like, great, you can teach React, but that's not what you're going to be assessed on. It's very rare when I see a junior developer applying to a company and getting a React question. It will help them do the job better once they've learned the fundamentals as well. But fundamental assessments is what happens at most companies. Do some bootcamps do better than others? Lots of coding bootcamps actually use CodeSignal, and we've been educating them on, like, here is what companies are going to be assessing on. Because I feel like in many cases, the bootcamps themselves don't know what the graduates are going to be assessed on until it's too late, until they're like, oh, wow, I did good in the bootcamp, but I can't really pass some of these initial assessments. So we've been helping them understand and introduce really, really quickly more core knowledge, more core computer science curriculum into the program. Even though it's hard, again, and this is part of the reason why bootcamps avoid it, is like the core is hard to master. It takes many, many hours of hard practice to master it, but it goes a long way. And most top tier companies really value the strength of your core and not just how well do you understand frameworks.
Have you thought about collaborating with the boot camps to provide assessments for them to be like, okay, the student should pass this before they're ready to go like interview with companies?
I mean, name the top 5 bootcamps. At least 60% of those are already using CodeSignal for everything from admission to sort of midterm evaluations to graduation. Some of them are trying to kind of introduce it as a, hey, okay, use CodeSignal GCA as a way to say, are you ready or not? But again, it has a similar issue with like how the business model of the bootcamp works. Just like with schools, right? Like, unfortunately, the admissions department usually gets all the money because it's like, you know, the more people you admit, the higher our revenues, not the outcomes department, right? When the outcomes department is the focus, the outcomes department gets a lot of attention, and making sure that whatever curriculum you have is aligned with the outcome becomes critical. So I would say when selecting bootcamps, try to focus on those where they don't just make money when you get admitted, they make money when you get the job, because then incentives are aligned and they're going to try to do everything possible so that, you know, you're prepared for those interviews.
So that would be like Lambda School, right? Because they have the ISA kind of deal.
Well, the Lambda School is one of our customers who's got CodeSignal embedded all over it.
Okay. And you said they use it for admissions? Like, wouldn't that be too difficult for somebody applying to a bootcamp?
Here's the interesting thing, right? There is also a very wide range of sort of initial preparation that so those who go to apply to a bootcamp have, starting from if you have more of a math background or like a technical background, right? Because honestly, computer science at some point used to be a branch of math, and then it branched out, became its own thing. But like some of the fundamentals in math, even just the analytical thinking makes the difference. From a bootcamp's perspective, I don't know exactly what they use for admissions, but many of them use coding assessments in the early stages, even if it's very basic coding assessment, right? Just to see, like, if nothing else, to see where you're at right now. Because if I don't know where you're at right now, how on earth am I expected to sort of push you to the next level? I need to know your current ability to really cater content to you. That's kind of at the edge, but still doable. And that keeps you engaged, but still doesn't demotivate you that you just can't do it at all. So admission assessments for educational purposes are a massive use case because, and generally, like as you go through the program, just understanding where you're at, there's a reason tutors produce the 2 standard deviation above educational outcomes. It's called the Bloom's 2 sigma effect. And the reason tutors do that is they do one-on-one assessment and at a very frequent basis, and they know where you're at and they can kind of shepherd you through instead of a professor who says, here's a generalized content, good luck. And some people get bored, others get frustrated, and there's really zero winning.
Yeah, I think Dev Bootcamp had, do you remember what the assessment was, Brady? Is something with like dice and calendar
Yes.
date or something like, or cubes.
Yeah, cubes.
Displaying the calendar date or something. I
Yeah,
forget
like
exactly what it was.
just general logic of like there were cubes with different digits on it, and how can you have the fewest number of cubes to get get all of the dates or something like that. Yeah,
It
Sounds like
was
a
some
math
kind of,
problem.
it
logic
was
for
you.
sure.
Yeah.
I think you have to do it in Ruby. I forget.
I didn't have to do that. That was kind of like it was the basic problem solving. I don't remember if I coded that. I was thinking I didn't, that it was just like,
Oh, maybe it was verbal. I forget. That was 7 years ago for me.
but I for sure had to do it was some sort of like loop that it was relatively simple, but at the time I was like, I've never made a loop before. My brain is melting. It was like, it was hard for me.
But yeah, I guess that's a good sign then if the boot camp is like giving you a coding assessment.
All right then. What's the flagship feature within CodeSignal? What makes it different from other products?
Really depends on who you ask. If you ask candidates would say the IDE and the overall experience of, just the smoothness, right? Like everything from having VS Code style auto-completion. And actually, somebody asked, how can we best prepare for CodeSignal assessment? Use VS Code if you're not already using it. I mean, it is one of the top 3 most popular IDEs, but CodeSignal's core is built on VS Code. So all the auto-completion and everything else is going to feel very familiar if you're used to that IDE. So from a candidate's experience, is definitely the IDE and just the core experience of like being able to easily debug and how auto-completion when you need it, especially if you're using a language that's very auto-completion heavy. It will make a difference. From a recruiter's perspective, they love CodeSignal because of the accuracy of the scoring and the signal that it produces. Because if you're using an assessment, what you want is like accurate prediction of someone's performance on the interview. And in many cases, automated assessment products just don't deliver that. And you end up with like too many false positives or too many false negatives. And also the true leverage that it provides to really assess. I mean, if you think about a recruiter's job, they are dependent way too much on engineering because they can't assess your ability themselves unless they just look at resumes. So we really empower them and give them leverage, right? So as a recruiter, you're like all of a sudden can evaluate thousands of engineers in a matter of days. Really gives you tons of leverage to find those hidden gems and not just be constantly afraid of like, all right, who do I put in front of engineering to not get yelled at? Because if engineering is doing the evaluation, I mean, you guys don't think about it from a recruiter's perspective. You're like, you bad recruiter, why didn't you choose my resume? I mean, it's high stakes for them too. If they chose your resume, you don't do well on that interview, they're the one going to get yelled at because they're like, why did you could see from this resume, this person was never going to do well, right? Like, go fight that argument when you take chances on people. And then when it comes to hiring managers, every single, like, if you go look at some of our customer interviews, they keep saying the playback is their favorite feature because they really get to see in depth what is somebody thinking through and how they're approaching a specific problem, not just did they get to the end or did they not.
All right. Have you read Cracking the Coding interview book? Would you recommend that one alongside CodeSignal challenges?
It's not bad. I haven't seen the recent revisions. I don't know if it's changed. The last one I've seen was like 6 years ago. I do think it's changed a lot. I mean, if the Cracking the Coding interview hasn't adapted to what it is today, I think it might be outdated. Like last time I read it, there's tons of questions there's no clear differentiation between what like junior developer should expect to be asked, what a senior developer should expect to ask. It's kind of, it assumes that all interviews are the same. And funny enough, it's built on top of what Google, Amazon, and some of these giants used to do. And even they have changed their practices. And I'm not even talking about like all the unicorn companies. So I really think it depends on where you're applying, and has cracking the coding interviews changed and updated, because it's not a static thing. Like it evolves on yearly, if not monthly basis. So yeah, haven't read the recent revisions, so can't say.
So that other book you recommended, is that one better because it's just newer?
No, that one is
Introduction.
actually very old, but that's its focus is on algorithms, and algorithms haven't changed for a long time. And core fundamental algorithms such as a binary search, or strategies such as like a greedy or a divide and conquer. I mean, those are like as fundamental to computer science as, I don't know, solving quadratic equations are to math. So studying those and learning those, again, you want to work for companies where what they assess you on is actually relevant to the job, right? So instead of optimizing too much on like, all right, what do I do to get passed through the interview? You should optimize on what do I do to become a better software developer. And those companies who can't recognize that, they're lost. If you keep interviewing, you'll find a company who can recognize that. Optimizing for interviews, all I'm saying is the wrong thing to optimize for.
Yeah, I always suggest that to people, that just focus on getting a little better every day, and
Right.
the opportunities will eventually come to you.
Yeah, you don't want to work at companies who can't recognize that, right? It says hiring practices and how people approach it and how they evaluate. It says many things about the company. So you don't want to be, covering for their faults. You want to focus on getting better as an engineer.
Yeah, totally agree.
Very much agree. Here's a question about the logo. This person's curious about the logo and what it refers to.
Yeah. So remember, the company used to be called Code Fights. That should give you a hint. It's two F's backwards right together. So the very first iteration of the product was a sort of a versus code fight, and the two F's backwards to make a V is the history behind the logo.
Funny. All right. We were kind of talking about this. Maybe you already answered earlier. Here's a question wondering if they should add comments on thought process on coding challenge submissions.
Yeah, so I already kind of touched on this, where it's like it shouldn't be prioritized above getting to your code working. But if you have the time, it can help, because many hiring managers will look at it later in the process to see how you've been thinking about it and structuring your code. You can also overdo it. Honestly, I've seen people write essays, and sometimes when a hiring manager looks at it, they're like, okay, writing essays in your code is not a good idea. So they don't know if you did it to just really explain it to them, or that's how you write code. Because being concise in your code also matters, because they want other developers not to spend hours understanding what on earth you're doing. It's just concise one-liners whenever one-liner is needed, or writing your code in a way where somebody reading your code shouldn't need an explanation to understand what you're doing. That's actually even better, because you've saved time for others to like read your comments, and then you read your code, and then you read your comments again.
Got it. Do companies get to choose the coding problems that the candidates work on, or is that something that CodeSignal chooses?
There is both versions of it. So if a company is using our standardized assessments, such as the GCAA, especially for early talent hiring, we are in charge of it. So we design and maintain it. We introduce hundreds of variations to make sure people can't just lick it on LitCode and then copy it. Because the unfortunate thing is that if you allow for any sort of cheating, if 10% of the candidates have familiarity with the questions, that ruins the game for everybody else. Because when you're considering 1,000 candidates, 100 people who've made their way through who shouldn't have is a huge burden. So the only way companies are going to keep trusting a skills-based approach is if they can be sure that cheating and plagiarism is minimized. So that's why for our standardized assessments, which are used for really large volumes, such as early talent hiring, we design and maintain it, and we introduce so many variations that it's practically impossible. If you try to leak and memorize it all, you just become better as a developer. It's impossible to just cheat your way through it. But we also have custom assessments where companies build those and they maintain it, in which case they got to choose it. We still give them guidance and best practices around what to and not to do when designing those assessments, but we don't proactively design and maintain those.
Okay. Are there any behavioral questions on CodeSignal?
We don't specialize in that. We don't build those ourselves. I mean, we support multiple choice questions. So I have seen clients take CodeSignal and turn it into like a personality assessment. I don't subscribe to that. There are companies who do personality assessments and that's their bread and butter. It's not one of ours and I don't want to be in that space.
Okay, yeah.
While there's value, I don't, there's a reason there is code in the name of the company. We focus on hard skills.
Got it. So it's mostly coding. And then the second part of this question was, does it give you any feedback so that you can improve?
Yeah, so I mean, the main feedback that it gives you is whether your code is actually working or not. So it's not one of those where you just wrote some code and you click submit and it says, thank you for your submission. No, I mean, it will tell you, are you passing the test cases? Are you not? Like, where do you have a bug? And it would encourage you to debug it as far as you can to get there. So that's, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to improve. Some of our standardized assessments would also tell you like how you did in comparison to others and what are some of the areas that you might be lacking. High level, like problem solving, speed, because our standardized assessments separate the measurement of like, can you do an optimization of an algorithm versus if I told you exactly what to do, right? Wrote down line by line in English, can you translate that English into a language that a computer understands? We separate those. And at the end, we would tell you sort of which one are you better at? Do you need to practice your implementation ability and not getting jumbled in your own code, which many junior developers do? Or should you be optimizing on reading some of the core algorithms so you know how to solve the problem better? The goal is eventually to give even more feedback, because unfortunately for the fear of litigation, most companies, especially when they do a human interview, are very afraid to tell you any feedback. They would just say, give you a standard rejection letter. The good news about automated assessments, the algorithm that said, you know, correct, incorrect is highly objective and defensible. So we're in a better position to say, this is what you did right, this is what you did wrong, this is the area that you might be lacking in. So the eventual goal to make the candidate experience even better is to give more feedback and to point to specific resources that you can leverage to get better next time around.
Great. And man, being able to separate out the pseudocode from the actual implementation, that's huge, I think. That's very helpful. Great idea. You had mentioned recording keystrokes. Does it record keystrokes outside of the CodeSignal environment? No.
So the only thing it does is like you type code. I mean, it happens in our IDE, so you record it. We don't have access to your keyboard. That would be way too creepy.
All right. If you take the standardized coding assessment and don't like your score, can you retake it?
Take the standardized coding assessment you don't like.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I got the question. Depends on the company's permissions. So some companies give you permission to take it again. Others, so basically they pay for it. Think about it this way, right? It's free for, if you think of something like ACT, GRE, GMAT, right? It's hundreds of dollars. You don't pay to take a CodeSignal assessment, but somebody pays for it. Just like when you use any free product, somebody is paying for it. And in this case, who pays for you to take that assessment is the company that has invited you to take it. So we also give them the control if they allow retakes or not. In most cases, if you have a really legit reason and you go back to the company and say, hey, something happened, right? I had an emergency at home or something. Can you ask CodeSignal to give me a retake? It's a switch on our side that says allow this person to take it again.
And then this next one is wondering what would happen if a power outage happens in the middle of an ongoing assessment, or like you said, the system went down.
Great question. This is one of those very legit reasons how you would get a retake. if the system was actually, our system doesn't go down much. It's very rare as some of the very large companies. that employ thousands of people who are just responsible for making sure it doesn't go down. So it's very reliable, but it does happen. Software breaks at some point, and that's a very good reason to be allowed a retake. If you're in the middle of an interview, your interview will likely get rescheduled. If you're in the middle of an assessment, we'll find a way to give you a retake so that you're not penalized for it.
Good to hear.
The last time that it went down, one of our clients was running a simultaneous assessment with 5,000 candidates at the same time. They brought down the system for actually, I mean, at any given moment, there's several thousand people taking an assessment on CodeSignal. But there was a particular reason why that assessment was putting an extra load on it, and it brought it down. But they just rescheduled the event and they had it again later, so it all worked out.
Wait, they had
Great.
5,000 people like trying to apply for the position?
Yeah, this wasn't in the US. Outside of the US, there's way more competition, way more people looking to do the same thing. So yes, I've seen, the largest I've seen is 10,000. And this typically happens in India, where they try to do simultaneous because people leak the questions a lot and they distribute it. So to make sure it doesn't happen, they say, all right, you're going to take this assessment same day, same hour, which means it's really fun to see, like 10,000 people at the same time doing an assessment on CodeSignal. Pretty fun. We have a dashboard where you can see, yeah, great stress test, but you can also see kind of where like the assessment is happening every time somebody's running code and doing something. We can't see who, but just to see like the product live behind the scenes when 10,000 people are doing it, and you see the map light up and like everybody's just on CodeSignal. It's a thrilling feeling to watch that.
Wow. Here's a question wondering if you can reapply for a CodeSignal's position if you failed the coding challenge the first time after like a month or two, or some companies have a 6-month policy.
Really depends on the position and if we have a different assessment for you. Again, for more like niche roles like a senior JavaScript engineer, we've built a custom assessment and there's no, at least at this point, too many variations of that. So, but if there is, more than happy to reconsider you after a couple of months. If you've worked hard, a couple of months is a long time and skill set can change. So.
Absolutely. All right. And then this person likes to use a pen and paper as a tool to help with problem solving. Is there a way to upload notes to show this thought process?
Yeah, there's no way to upload a picture unless the question is specifically like, write some sort of an observation or thought process and upload an image. However, you can always write your thought process in the notes, just kind of copy over the main parts of it. Again, we avoid doing too much with like take pictures with a camera and upload it into the system. You'd be shocked how much bias can be introduced just from that, because there's no way if you took a picture with a camera of your notes, some of your background and like who you are and what you look like and what your setting is gonna flow over to the company. We really try hard to minimize that because it's one of the big reasons why there is so much bias in the industry is interviews are very human driven and humans are very biased.
Do you have any sort of statistic about what is the average level for developers to be noticed by companies on CodeSignal?
I can't share it, but we do. I mean, we have like massive stats around, even company by company. Like we know on our end, like literally, for example, if the company is using GCA, what is the threshold of GCA that you need to get to be noticed by a specific company? Obviously, it's a company-specific data, so we don't have the power to share. We mostly leverage that to give companies more visibility into like where they sit in the grand scheme of things and understand. Because every company you ask, they say we hire the top 2% of developers. That's not true. I'm sure you could have guessed if everybody's hiring the top 2%, who's hiring everybody else. So we help companies just get a better visibility into it. But unless the company like specifically okays to share that, we really can't share it.
What would you say is a score that you should shoot for while practicing before you start applying do
Yeah,
jobs.
if we're talking about GCA, which has a practice assessments and the test center, anything below 700 is unlikely to get you a job. So if you get a score, it goes from 300 to 850. There's very few companies that would consider candidates that have gotten below 700 score. So that's a good benchmark to shoot for. And then it just sort of increases from there. Some companies go for 820 plus, others go for 800 plus, others go for 750. In many cases, it's not the only condition, by the way, right? So it's not just like, you get this score, then you're golden, you didn't, you don't move forward. In many cases, it augments your application. So if you get above a 700, and then people would look at like, okay, you've been coding since 13 and you only got a 725, not so great for you. You're a fresh coding bootcamp grad who started coding like 3 months ago and you have a 730, that's pretty impressive, right? So like it matters sort of what opportunities and resources you've had to get to a certain point. It's not just what point you're at this moment.
Okay, awesome. That's good to know.
All right. These are some questions from earlier on, but is there a terminal or console to view code errors in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's, if you're doing an interview, there's even an interactive console where like just literally a terminal where you can inspect and like set breakpoints and install packages and things like that. In the live assessment mode, there's still a terminal console. It's not interactive, so it's not a REPL, but you can still see stack traces, line by line errors, and debug your code. We're planning to introduce the terminal, like the interactive REPL, into the automated assessment piece as well. If you guys are interested in the technical details of it, you can imagine to give you an interactive REPL, we have to occupy pretty much a dedicated Docker that's just yours while you interact with it in the background when you run the code. It's expensive, and given the number of assessments at any moment that go on CodeSignal, it's kind of a heavy lift, but we'll get there.
All right. And then could a junior developer pay to take the GCA to be able to make their score available to their employers?
It's a good question. The answer is no. And I guess for a reason, more of a philosophical reason, because we don't want the money to become like one reason why I think SATs are not great is they create this entire paid practice, paid prep, and paid take retake system, which, I mean, we have a massive socioeconomic problem in the country. And when you start making something that's supposed to help people get noticed, help make it more fair, build an entire consumer monetization layer on top of it, it makes the problem worse instead of making it better. So our philosophical stance has always been that all the practice resources, all of the sort of taking the assessment piece should be free for the development side to not create or make worse the socioeconomic gap that already exists.
Do you know if it's helpful to put your, if you took the practice tests, is it helpful to put the link like on your resume?
You can even share the practice one, by the way. When companies ask, you have the option to share the practice and say, hey, I've done well. If you just want to put the practice on your resume, that can help too, by all means. So it can't hurt. One thing, I do not anticipate we call it coding score and coding report, like a credit score and a credit report. Just like a credit score and a credit report, I do not anticipate it becoming something people put on their LinkedIns or widely publicized, because it's your fair and objective skill data. It's personal, right? If you're really good, you're just being a show off by putting it in somewhere public. If you're not so great, you probably don't want all of your friends and your relatives to see your scores. So.
All right. And then what are the usual test cases for coding challenges?
Usual test cases for coding challenges. Not sure I understand the question, I guess. It really depends on the coding question, I guess.
Yeah, I'm thinking it might be from someone who, I mean, a junior who maybe doesn't have a ton of test case experience. So
right. I can explain what a test case here means, right? A test case is essentially saying, trying to verify whether your your code does what it was supposed to do. Because we don't control how you solve it, right? It shouldn't be like you have to do it in this very specific way. You can do the question in whatever way you see fit. It's more like, let's say the questions for the simplicity's sake said, reverse a string, right? Like we'll give you a string, you have to take that string and show me the reverse version of it. A test case would be given AB, produce BA, given A, produce A, given 10001, produce same string because it's a so-called palindrome, right? Those are test cases that would validate whether whatever code you wrote or however you've processed the string did the right thing or didn't. Because we don't want to evaluate you on the approach necessarily. We want to evaluate you. That's why I say functional correctness. Does it do what it was supposed to do, or does it fail to do what it was supposed to do?
And then just to add to that, if it was the test case word that was confusing to someone, a lot of times it can be easy to think that every situation would be similar, but like what you were kind of describing, like if you're reversing a whole string and you're not thinking about that scenario when there's just one thing, or if there's
or
like
nothing at all,
zero,
right?
yeah.
That's where all the errors that you didn't handle come.
Yep. So it's kind of like setting yourself up to think about all of the edge cases, and you're doing that for them.
Yep.
Great. Do companies use CodeSignal in place of in-person assessments, or is it more common to do both CodeSignal and then an in-person code assessment?
Well, these days, in-person coding assessments are not very common. Well, these days, they're called virtual on-sites. And those virtual on-sites also happen on CodeSignal. So on the corporate side, CodeSignal has, I guess we can get more visual. There's certified test interview. That's what companies have as their CodeSignal solutions. Certified is where all of our standardized assessments live, but automated, standardized, automated. Test is where all of our customizable assessments live, where companies can build their own. An interview is that same IDE, but in a collaborative mode with an embedded audio video calling and a whiteboard, but that same IDE in which the interviewer and the candidate can write code. It could be sitting next to each other. It could be, these days, it's mostly like this, where it's like remote writing code together. In most cases, companies do both an automated assessment early on to really see who should be moving forward, because you can imagine that engineering time is really expensive. If the company is hiring engineers, you better bet they're understaffed in engineering, and every single engineering interview is that understaffed resource spent. So companies tend to be very careful with how they spend that understaffed resource, and they leave it as the last stage typically, where it's like you go through a live collaboration, usually to test more of your collaboration and thinking and problem solving skills, because we don't measure that in the automation. Maybe one day we will, but in the automated form, we don't measure for your collaboration skills or like maybe code review skills. So a lot of our customers do those kinds of exercises when it comes to the so-called virtual on-sites.
All right. Oh, big jump here. Relating to a previous question, can you share average experience points at large to be noticed by companies?
I'm guessing people are talking about the GCA and the scoring system with the coding score that I've mentioned. I think 700 plus is not a bad place. If you really want to be noticed by more companies than less, I think at least shooting for a 750 is a good idea. So if you get a 750 plus, your chances of getting through some of that initial assessments are better. If you score below 700, chances are low. It's hard to say an average because it very much depends on the industry and the company. Look, heavy tech companies have a higher sort of expectation from your core ability to program. Companies who do more like tech consulting or are non-tech companies who have a tech arm definitely have a lower expectation and a lower bar. So it very much depends what your target is, right? If the target is, for example, to work at the Googles and the Facebooks and the assessment tries to mirror whatever is going to happen in the rest of the interviews, right? Our bar is to correlate to the human interview. And if we have a high correlation, we're doing our job well, we're doing a good initial screening. So it's not about really CodeSignal, it's about, are you going to survive the next interview? And different companies have a very different bar when it comes to their human interviews.
It makes sense. All right. This is a question wondering, how did the idea for CodeSignal come to you and what drove you to develop it further?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is around, like, I have a general obsession about human talent. I believe that most healthy humans with healthy brains have incredible potential. And right now, we're not utilizing, we're very bad at utilizing it. We're very bad at identifying it, developing it. And I've spent many, many years thinking about, like, how can it be better, right? So because it weaves into from early education to college education to on the job continuous learning. It's all over the place how someone's talent develops. And I've tackled it from all sorts of angles, from, like, even with this company, from an educational angle, from an evaluation angle. My core belief has for many years been that assessments is the missing piece of the puzzle. Automated assessments, because if you can automate assessments, you can truly enable not just companies finding talent in a better way, not just companies going beyond resumes, but you can start enabling better learning, better preparation, and knowing that, if you're really good, if you put the thousands and thousands of hours necessary to get good at this hard skill, that would get recognized, right? Because if you think about it, it's a cycle. You have to work really hard. It's many, many hours. And when you're thinking about, like, okay, once I get there, there is a chance that people will be like, oh, well, you don't have a great degree from a well-known institution. It's very demotivating, right? So, like, I want to make sure that people have that motivation to know if you get there, you'll get recognized, and focus on getting there, and not just, bribing university officials to get into a good school. It shouldn't be what matters. Where you went to school and what your degree you got shouldn't be what matters. And in my experience, I mean, sure, I went to MIT, but I came from nothing. I grew up in a, faraway land in Eastern Europe. And if not for just randomly getting on the map by being in a bunch of math Olympiads, I would have never gotten anywhere. And the story behind the company in many ways goes by my CTO, who had also grew up in the same country, also he was always the better programmer. He went to, like, international coding Olympiads, and he was really good at programming as a kid, but, like, he didn't go to MIT. But when it came to a job hunt time, I had so much more attention than he did, right? Even though he was always the better programmer. And that difference in the past really showed me how broken it is. I mean, once you see it, it's hard to unsee it, but something in your personal experience has to sort of poke you in the eye for you to realize how broken this whole system is.
Well, we're grateful that you saw it and did decide to do something about it. Yeah. How lucky for us. All right. What's your favorite language or framework to work with?
I guess I gave it up. I mean, they don't let me code these days. At some point, they were like, Tigran, you go do other stuff, even though I did build with around the first version of the product. But yeah, I mean, since the very beginning, I always believed that JavaScript is the future. And so far, it's proven to be correct. I mean, when we first started writing code on this was like 2013. And back then, JavaScript was far from being as popular as it is today. So it's kind of been fun to watch that prediction come more and more true.
What do you think about TypeScript, and do you guys use it?
Trying to think. I believe we use TypeScript. I believe we do. Again, they don't let me code these days. When I was still writing code, we didn't use it. But nowadays we have developers who are far better than I am. So I believe they use TypeScript.
And then maybe we do one last question. How big is the CodeSignal team, and how many people are working on the platform, if you don't care to?
This is the biggest shocker when people realize how small we actually are. So we're actually under 50 people. So we just raised a Series B, 25 million Series B, because things have been really progressing a lot and making a ton of progress. But the team has always been, thank you, small and mighty, and really dedicated to kind of making a change, making a dent in the universe, and the right type of dent. So yeah, the team is really small, but we are growing it. Like, I'm expecting us to be 3x the current size by the time we're end of next year. But we're also extremely selective because I'm a big believer in having a very, very small but a really strong team who can, because it just makes the team overall more motivated when you can have a bigger impact. If some companies go just for like numbers, and then in the end, that's not only starting to reduce some of the quality, but also leads to a state where each individual has a smaller impact. And I think it's way more motivating when you see that, like, I mean, many of our developers, our development team is less than 15, and most of the developers have built massive features that are like, you know, when you see someone who, without a traditional pedigree, without all of the somebody who the recruiter literally says when you talk to them, we would have never moved this person forward if they didn't have the CodeSignal assessment. And being able to bring it back and say, all right, this person has been able to get there because of this feature and this feature and this feature, and here are the individuals who've built those features. It's really satisfying in terms of the impact that you're making, to know that you've really personally affected someone's life by building something.
Amazing. And I think we had talked about the stack. Is that correct? I think you had mentioned it's all JavaScript.
It's JavaScript, it's Node, it's some Meteor.js, it's MongoDB in the back end, it's React in the front end, so all the good stuff.
Cool. Well, that's all the questions for now, and we're pretty much at time. So if
thanks
yeah,
for joining us today, Tigran.
Thank you guys.
Awesome.
It's been great talking to you. It's
Thank you. I appreciate
clear
it.
there's so much passion behind all of this this company.
Yeah. It's also interesting to hear that the B2B side that we don't see is actually the main thing you guys are focusing on. I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny how I think people perceive CodeSignal as what you see on the front end side, but there's so much, it's like the other side of the iceberg. It really is. There's so much more to it. And I think it's only when you see it from the B2B side when you start to appreciate the depth of it. So
awesome. Well, I guess we're gonna stop recording now and let people just introduce themselves. You don't have to stick around if you don't want to, Tigran. It's up to you.
I'm happy to stay. It's a Saturday. I don't have any better place to be, so I'll stay with you guys.
Okay.